Today at Something to Talk About here at the Bainbridge Island Senior Community Center, we're welcoming Christy Carr, who is serving on the Bainbridge Island City Council. She was appointed to office and has been serving, you'll have to tell me exactly how many years, Christy, but decided not to stand for re-election in the current campaign. And since the Senior Center is not going to do any kind of a campaign forum until after the primary, I thought that it might be nice to have Christy give us a little insight about her views of things that are key issues, so that as we are looking over the candidates that are running, we might have the perspective of a sitting council member who's sort of disengaged in the rough and tumble of this particular election, about what things we might want to keep in mind as we're looking at potential candidates. So Christy, thank you very much for joining us. And I'd love it if you give a little introduction of how you came to seek and then take a position on the council.
Sure. Thank you for having me. I appreciate being here. And like you said, I was appointed. That was in May of 2019. I filled a vacancy in the South Ward when Matt Tierman resigned. And at that time, I had been away from the city of Bainbridge Island for a little while. Was it 20? It must have been 2020. That's right. It was 2020 because I left the city of Bainbridge Island Planning Department. I was a long-range planner there for 5 years in 2019 and went to the city of Seattle for a different job. And so I felt a little bit like I had some unfinished business with the city in terms of projects that I had worked on and not finished. And I also saw what was on the work plan for the city council in the next 18 months for the course of that remaining term. And I thought that with my planning background and familiarity with the city, the planning department specifically, but the city in general, I thought that I could hit the ground running, if you will, and just provide some value to the council in terms of my experience with land use. So when I saw the opportunity come up, I threw my hat in the ring, and I was very humbled and thankful that the council selected me to fill that position.
So is that your first position of an elected office, although you were elected, I guess, by the council?
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I kind of joked it. I only had to get 6 votes, and I did. So, yeah, and I feel that I just, I picked up the baton of former council member Tierman, and I'm going to take it to the finish to the end of this year, and then just give somebody else the opportunity to serve the community in this unique way. I think that if I hadn't worked for the city and didn't have the background that I do, it'd be a lot more intimidating. I understand why we don't get more candidates. It's a lot. It's a big job. And I know it was somewhat controversial that we got a raise, which I did not anticipate receiving myself. I thought it would start at the first of the year. So that was a surprise. Frankly, that wouldn't have been my preference. I don't think people do this job for the money. We get a stipend, which makes it a little more bearable, but I think people do this job because they care about this community. Unfortunately, we don't always come off that way at council meetings, but I do think that is across the board why 7 people are up there representing the community. It's because they care about it.
So I just want to clarify about the raise. There was a commission that reviewed this and then made the recommendation that the current stipend or payment honorarium salary was not as large as it seemed to that commission that it should be relative to the responsibilities, et cetera. And then that came before the council for a vote. Is that correct?
No, the salary commission, the way it's set up, it's one of the options via state law to have a salary commission. And they met and they determined what our salary would be, and it became effective immediately. The council had nothing to do with it. That being said, the council appointed the salary commission, so you can think the council had something to do with it in that way. But in terms of a vote, there was no vote by the council on our own salary. It was the determination of the salary commission.
So hence the surprise to you of how it played out.
Yeah, and I didn't know those were public meetings, but I did not attend, nor was I tracking them. So I didn't know what their discussions were. They did give the request that council members filled out a survey, which essentially asked how much time do you spend on a weekly basis on a list of different activities.
And were you surprised when you started to serve on the council, how many hours you were spending? I know that one of the things that Michael Pollan said when he was running was that he intended to not make this a full-time job.
Right. It is more, I think, than I anticipated. I've had as many as 5 meetings in 1 week. I've had meetings on Friday nights. I've had meetings on Sunday mornings. I think we get an incredible amount of email. Our meetings are incredibly long. I try to be responsive to people, call them back if I can, or return their emails. We also have liaison responsibilities for all of the city's committees and commissions. A council person is assigned as a liaison to each of those. And then there's a list of at least 6 or 8 regional bodies that we have a liaison to. So council members have responsibility for many, many meetings other than just our Tuesday nights. So yeah, it is more work than I thought. But I think that it's more meetings than I thought. But council people can choose to engage or not engage as they like. So in that sense, it kind of depends on what kind of council person you want to be. I mean, I think that there's a requisite responsiveness to your constituents, but there are varying levels of that. So, not every council person responds to email. Not every council person returns phone calls. It's a choice that elected officials get to make.
And do you find that most of the communications come that way? I know that you have done walks around the South Ward. Do you get people turning out for those one-on-ones, or is it more likely middle of the night emails sent to the council?
It's definitely much more in terms of emails. I have had a nice small group of people join me on my Walk the Ward. I'll have another one the first Saturday in August. So I hope that some of your group will join me. And those are fun, although I've actually realized people aren't really necessarily interested in talking about city topics, but it's a good time anyway. I've really, really enjoyed it. Mostly email for sure. Very few phone calls, tons and tons of email.
And in your view, is the amount of time that's being asked of, or that you felt that you were serving as a council person, a reasonable request of us to make of our elected officials? In other words, what as voters should we expect in terms of responsiveness and engagement from the people that we're electing to this job, in your view?
Well, our new city manager actually has told us that we're the hardest working council he's ever come across. He thinks we work way too hard and we do too much and we try to do too much. So I guess from a standard business practice standpoint, we work too hard. And I think we just had our retreat last weekend. And I think we all came to the consensus that we need to work smarter. And so I think that we may put too much time in, but it may not always be time well spent. So I think that if we can learn to be more efficient and work smarter, that the job will become more attractive to a broader spectrum of the community.
So when you talk about working smarter, is that thinking more about what the role, I mean, because you have worked as a city staff member, what the role of a council person is, what the role of a manager is, what the role of planning staff and et cetera, the staff members, the public works people, what part the council should be sort of doing and what part is sort of beyond their scope or too granular for effective action.
Yeah, I think the way I look at it is that kind of stay in your lane sort of situation. We do have a form of government that's articulated in state law. So there are actual things that the city council is not supposed to do by law, like direct staff. I think that it's been pretty public that the council has been fairly hands-on on a number of different projects in the last several years, which I think understandably has slowed things down. So I think that we're in a great position right now because we're transitioning to working with a new city manager who is a really tested professional. I think he's really personable and quite casual within the context of being a real quintessential professional. And I think he's going to help us in that regard in terms of making sure he's helping us get our work done, and he has the staff that he needs to help him deliver on that. And I think he really understands how a municipal corporation functions. So I'm really looking forward. It's really one of my regrets, maybe the only one, not continuing on council, is to not have the opportunity to work with Mr. King for a longer period of time, because I really have high hopes for his tenure here with the city.
Are there things you talked about, projects that you saw in the 18 months or so when you were starting to participate as a council member? Are there things there that you thought would be done that aren't?
Well, I guess I think I understood how long things take. I think rehashing things, we're dealing with Eagle Harbor Phase 2 non-motorized improvements that has taken way too long. And it's largely due to, I think, council direction that the Public Works Department has received, and we're kind of designing on the fly. And that's a really challenging way to design build infrastructure project. So I didn't vote for that, actually, because I just wanted to make a statement that that's not the way we should be doing non-motorized planning, design, and implementation and funding. So that's an example of something that I don't think has worked out also so well. But admittedly, we are in a transition phase there, because that was a project that was on the books. And we're now doing a sustainable transportation plan. So there's some reasons for it, but that's an example of, I think, inefficiency.
So this is the work to try to around the end of Eagle Harbor provide more, I guess, north-south non-motorized access.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And the challenge for you was that it was reviewed and re-reviewed, or?
Right. Well, it just the initial project really was just for shoulders, and then the scope increased, and so it became a separated facility, and it's different on each side of the road. Right. And as the design changed, the funding changed, the timeline changed. So hopefully the outcome is good.
Well, yes, and then we will reward ourselves for our patience, I guess. So as a person who has now served in city government as a staff member and now also as a council member, when you are thinking about the qualities of somebody that you would vote for a council position, what kinds of questions do you ask yourself? I'm not asking you for your endorsement of current candidates, but just thinking about what elements you thinking about in your head.
Well, I'll start by saying I'm not endorsing any candidates for any of the ward races. And then I'll also say that this may not be the same and for any candidate, but what I've learned the most about during my time on council is about myself, really, and how to work with people. And I think that that's a question that that candidates really need to ask themselves is, why are you there? And can you work with 6 other people for the betterment of the community? And always remembering that you're there on behalf of the community. And I really walked in and raised my hand to do this without an agenda. I really just wanted to be of service to both the council and the community. So sure, I have ideas about things, but I don't have a personal agenda. And I think that being able to work with people is just really key. I think we've all seen that council discussions, council progress can go sideways really quickly. And I think that that's something that I would look for in a candidate, is someone who's really interested in being collaborative with their partners or their colleagues, and trusting staff to do their job, and just being able to move good ideas forward, regardless of who brings the ideas forward.
And when I look at the League of Women Voters discussion that we actually shared with our membership this morning, those of you who weren't able to see it in person, I noticed that really that's the kind of thing that we very rarely ask anybody. In other words, they're usually questions that we pose to candidates are about issues or specific projects. You know, how do you feel about revisiting the police station decision? That was one of the questions that came up.
Sure.
Much like when Matt Tierman was running, the question of whether you would support the bridge over the Highway 305. And what you're saying is maybe asking for examples of how you have worked together with people or come to consensus or worked with a situation where the outcome wasn't exactly what you had hoped for might be more instructive things for us to think about in our elected officials.
I mean, I think so, or as instructive, really. I think that hopefully candidates have some level of understanding and an opinion on issues before the city at this point. But yeah, I think just working style is really important.
I want to make sure that if anybody has a question or comment of their own, they feel comfortable to open up your microphone and ask Christy or weigh in here. Yes, Rita.
So I was just wondering, Christy, I'm confused about the police station. Is it off or is it on? I mean, is it at a stopping point so that it's being reviewed again and maybe some other sites are going to go, or are they moving ahead with permits?
So actually my understanding is that the project is fully permitted and that the construction documents are more or less ready to go to bid, but that they have not gone to bid because there are some council members who would like to look at the choice of the facility location and the purchase of the building again, and that the city manager, that we didn't move forward with putting the project out to bid because at the interim city manager thought it was more prudent basically to wait until the new city manager got here. to give him the opportunity to familiarize himself with the project. So that's where we are now. And I think the city manager said he will be bringing back additional information. We'll start discussing it again next month sometime.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Tom Kilbane, do you have a comment or question?
Yeah, I guess it's a comment. Yeah, you, I'm sure, are aware that all of the municipalities, like the Park District, the fire department, and the state and the county, along with the city, can share properties. You don't have to sell it to one another. You can gift it or, or trade it or whatever. I am amazed that this never comes up with all of the properties that are owned by these various government agencies. Rather than buying property, they could be dealing with each other. All the property is owned by the taxpayers. So it's in the interest, of the taxpayers for this to be looked at. Have you ever talked about that, or has anyone brought it up?
Do you mean for the police court facility
For
specifically?
anything, for the police court, for the Park District, they're talking about buying a, what do you call it, a physical, that exercise
Athletic club?
Mhm.
athletic club. I mean, the city owned that property. In fact, I think you still own it. What do they call it? Suzuki over,
Mhm.
That at one time, I'm 6-8 years ago when we were working on the barn, we talked about that with the Park District, and the city was willing to, get involved. The Park District wasn't. That was 15 acres. And then they bought Suzuki with less than 2 acres buildable, which I think, I don't think they did their homework when they did that, but
I think that's Sakai, maybe
Sakai.
you mean?
Kai, yeah.
Mhm.
Anyway, I'm just curious because there's so much out there that it would be doable, if there was more intelligent cooperation among the agencies. I don't see it happening.
Yeah, I think I know that the city has surplused a number of properties to the Park District, so they're aware of the framework or the mechanism for property transfer. And specifically for the police court facility, I'm not sure that there was a site in the early days that any other taxing district owned that seemed suitable for a police court facility. I think that the Park District specifically in the city's relationship or working relationship has ebbed and flowed over the years. I think from what I've heard from the Park District and our city staff is that it's good now. We do have what's called an intergovernmental working group, IGWIG. We're supposed to meet.
With a name like that,
Yeah.
it's gotta be good.
Yeah, and so I know it meant more consistently in the past. I'm not sure what the status is of it right now. So I think that again will probably be something that the new city manager deals with.
Well, yeah, actually, the other entity that we didn't mention, the Board of Education, that falls into the same category. They could, and I'm sure there's school properties that are out there. I think there's one up on Mandus Olson that I'm sure they're never going to use.
So a very good point, Tom, about the idea that they're with IGWIG or some other connective, we might be able to in a governmental situation that's more like what Christy was talking about, problem solving rather than and sort of collaboration, and maybe not trying to push a specific goal, but work with other members to try to find it. That kind of thing might be useful in the future for sure. I'm wondering, Christy, if you might be able to tell us a little bit about what you see as the major challenges and sort of areas that we're going to be grappling with as a city over the next 18 months to 2-3 years as a resident?
Yeah, I think that, a general theme is kind of getting ahead of growth and development. I think that we saw a lot of growth and development that in general, I think a number of people in the community didn't feel was consistent with the comprehensive plan. That led to a development moratorium that took about 3 years to get through. It was just ended a few months ago. I think that unfortunately the city ends up on its back heels quite a bit, or at least it has for the last several years in terms of what's being built, and that we really need to be more proactive instead of fighting projects after the fact. We need to be supporting good projects that we want to see and that are consistent with our comp plan. So we still have a lot of work to do, I think, to implement our 2017 comp plan. A large piece of that is the update to the Winslow master plan. That hasn't been updated actually since the late 90s. If anyone remembers Winslow Tomorrow, that resulted in some updates in the mid 2000s. But really, we're dealing with a downtown plan that is 15 years old, and we've kind of seen the results of that because we're a different place now, and our planning documents need to reflect that. So I'm hoping that we'll initiate the Winslow Master Plan. There are a lot of things, issues that the Winslow Master Plan can solve more or less, at least in a planning framework, like affordable housing, like potentially having a functional transfer of development rights program, sustainable transportation. It's our only, what the state calls or the county calls a high capacity transit facility, the ferry. So I think growth and development will continue to come to Bainbridge. We don't need to increase density to meet our state growth allocations. But if it's coming, we want to have a better sense and more control over where it goes and what it looks like. We want it to be green. We want it to be water efficient. So I think we just still have a long way to go in terms of having our building and land use regulations catch up to the values and vision of our comprehensive plan. And that's the hard work that we have ahead of us.
So for those of us who don't understand the intricacies of how the pieces of government fit together, what part of that responsibility comes to the council? What part of that would be expected of a city manager? What kinds of things would the planning department be expected to do as part of bringing that comprehensive plan and the Winslow today, tomorrow, into clarity?
Well, I think that we need to understand dependencies and how different things fit together. And the council has to have a set of priorities and stick to it. So again, we just had our retreat, and I think that we've whittled it down, if you will, to a list of 5 or 6 things that we'd like to focus on in the next, definitely this year, likely the next 18 months or 2 years. And understanding that the Winslow Master Plan really is a linchpin to our growth and development strategy, and that we need to do that. We've been sidetracked a little bit with the Island Center sub-area planning process, but the sub-area is just that. It's a sub-area. Hold on, I've got to plug in my computer. And we need to launch or initiate that Winslow Master Plan. And that is the job of the council, to direct the city manager to do that. And then it's the city manager's responsibility to make sure that he's got staff or consultants on board who can do that work, and to help the city council craft agendas that take us efficiently through that work. There's a difference between policy direction and getting into the weeds and writing code and writing policies. Ultimately, the council has ownership of that. And so they do have a responsibility, I think, to go through things with a fine-tooth comb. If we're passing development regulations and code that impact people, impact our community, impact property values, development potential, it is the role of the council to review that and to have a say in it. That being said, they need to get out of the way when staff needs to do their work. So it's a partnership, I'd say, but again, knowing and understanding everybody's roles and responsibilities is important to keep big projects like that on track.
I think Sheila has a comment or question.
I do. Christy, hi. Thank you for being on today. I think you've touched on it, but I live at Winslow Arms and we have had a whole lot of problems and concerns and about the Winslow Hotel. Is that a done deal? Is that gone? Is that complete? If it is, fine, that's wonderful. Number two, is it going somewhere else? And what about the possibility of a hotel being built down here on Madison, up from Billy Shear's, whatever?
So I'll tell you where we are today in terms of the Winslow Hotel and the potential for future hotels in the Winslow core. There was legislation that came before the city council that was forwarded from the Planning Commission. And it came out of a joint land use subcommittee with members of the city council and the Planning Commission that had started working actually about a year ago. And one of the recommendations was that hotels be a prohibited use in Winslow to give the Planning Commission time to review that use and to see if and how hotels are consistent with the comp plan in the Winslow area. So that came forward in the form of an ordinance to the city council, I think February, March, April sometime. And so the city council passed that. And so now hotels are a prohibited use in Winslow. At the time the council passed that ordinance, the Winslow Hotel proponent had not submitted a building application. So at this time, the city is not able to accept a building permit application for that project because it is a prohibited use in the zone in which they want to put it. So at the time, there's no way for that project to move forward. Whether or not it will in the future, I don't have any tea leaves on that one. So I know that the council may be considering sending that piece of work in terms of reviewing whether or not hotels are consistent with the comp plan in the Winslow core to the Planning Commission in the very near future. I think we're actually talking about it on Tuesday. But as you guys know, legislation like that takes time. And it may be something that we decide to put a pause on in terms of looking at hotels specifically and just wrap it into the Winslow master plan update process that we're hoping to launch, I think, soon.
Which, as you were saying a moment ago, we might have dealt with if we had dealt with that earlier, the clarity around a project like this would have been known to the developer up front, one way or the other. Yes, if the master plan were a completed thing rather than something that has been put off.
Well, I think that, again, in terms of being proactive, in terms of the type of development we want to see that's consistent with our comprehensive plan, exactly. I think that we haven't done the code audit that we need to do in terms of looking at our municipal code and that includes allowable or permitted uses. to see if it is consistent with our comprehensive plan. We're 4 years into our comp plan and we haven't done that consistency analysis with our development code or our zoning code. So we continue to have projects or uses that again, people in the community and members of council don't feel are consistent with our comp plan. The moratorium on self-service storage was another one. If we had done that work and said, well, we don't think we want to have self-storage in the business industrial zone, we would have known that, and we wouldn't have kind of been on our back heels in doing that work in a moratorium situation. So it's really important, I think, to continue to remember that we need to make sure that our development regulations are consistent with our comprehensive plan, because staff is implementing our code, and that's their job. And so if the code results in projects that are inconsistent with the comp plan, we need to fix our code.
Great, that's very clear, and probably not as clear either to incoming council members who haven't been in office before, or to those of us who are voting on them. Diane, did you want to make a comment or question? You'll need to unmute yourself. There we go.
Muted.
You are, we hear you now.
I have a question I haven't heard anybody else bring up, and that's the post office property. Knowing how valuable land is in the center of Winslow, I'm wondering if anyone has ever thought about somehow trading properties, getting the post office out of downtown. I know they did that in Edmonds. It seems like with our businesses down there, it would be much more useful and efficient to have businesses rather than the post office. Has anyone ever talked about that?
Not that I'm aware of. I have not been a party to any discussions about that.
I remember, we've been here 20 years, and within the past 20 years, probably around 10 years ago, there was talk about moving it out to near where Ace Hardware is. And that kind of just died. Probably when they were talking about Winslow tomorrow, or, in that project, it might have been at that time.
Well, I do know that Town and Country had considered the idea of whether it made sense to remodel where they were or not. And fortunately, they decided to remodel where they were.
Yeah, and I would like to thank Christy for, coming and answering the questions today. I think you sound pretty reasonable to me. I hope you are. But I think all those things are worth, looking at it. And the post office is a big draw that, brings people downtown to shop. So from a commercial standpoint, it's not bad having it there. But, that's my opinion. One other comment I would make, a lot of people, constituents don't pay a lot of attention to what's happening in terms of zoning and planning. And then when something comes up that they don't like, they're all up in arms about it. But if it's, if it adheres to the zoning, you can't really do anything about it. If you take rights away from people, you have to pay for it. You end up losing those court cases. So, if the zoning permits it, and, the planning or council says, no, we're not gonna let you do it anyway, that's a big problem.
So that's what Tom's talking about, is the code referencing the comprehensive plan that you were just describing, right? We don't have a correspondence necessarily between those.
Yeah, I think that there are still some gaps that we've seen projects pop up that that show us that. And I think looking at it holistically and comprehensively at one time, would help us be more proactive about supporting good development instead of reacting to quote bad development. And I think it's really true. People are busy and people don't necessarily understand zoning and planning. And I think that, you know, Madison Avenue, for example, nobody probably understood what the different colors or the different zoning names meant, and they didn't understand it in 3D really. And so when you have a market that allows for that, it makes sense for someone to develop, they're going to. And I think that having people understand what we have on the books, more or less, is important. And that's a part of the outreach I think the city could improve upon. I think I love our new, she's not super new anymore, but Kristen Drew, I think, does a super good job with communications. I think that we can always do better and always do more. I think our website could be improved, but more outreach, more education to the community so that they understand things, because, you know, the fight is more or less lost when the dozer shows up in your backyard, you know, or down the block. That's not the time to get involved. And that's the lesson I think that is really important for people to understand, is that to understand what could happen and what the development potential is. And if you don't like it, or if you have something to say about it, you know, you need to get in front of it. And the change needs to be made, again, way before the dozer shows up.
So I am happy to always offer the Senior Community Center as a location for people who, and after, I mean, in your next months, if there are things that you want to talk about, we're happy to have you come back. And if after you're out of office and you're just ready to help us move this island forward as a very active constituent, please feel free to reach out to the Senior Community Center and see if we can help keep the conversation going. We are not interested in taking a particular side, but we are advocating for better community participation and understanding. And certainly when you get into a lot of planning and zoning, the code and the information gets shortened into acronyms and letters and numbers. You know, Eagle Harbor non-motorized phase 2 is kind of hard to think about what that might mean. So we're happy to try to suss those out a little bit with people.
That'd be super.
I want to thank you very much for spending the time with us today. This was tremendous, I think.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to do it. And I would be happy to come back. I think one of the things that I've sort of been mulling over as a former council member is to try to be a resource to people to help with that link, because when I understand, just based on the emails I get and the people I talk to now as a council person, that there is a need for increased understandings and accessibility to city business and process and how things really actually work. And since I have been on staff and on council and a 20-year community member, I think that I can help people with that. And I'd really like to be able to do that informally. And so if you have any ideas on helping me help people, that'd be super. And then I think just for your membership and we hear a lot about affordable housing and a housing crisis, and we are hopefully moving forward with a housing action plan. But I would definitely, a piece of that is hearing from the community. Why I'm really advocating for a housing action plan is to have a planning framework within which we can have really good, robust, broad conversations with the community, because I think that we need to hear from people about what we have and what we need and what the reality really is. We can't rely on sound bites. We can't rely on what's happening in Seattle or in Ballard or in other places. We really need to have solutions that work for Bainbridge Island and Bainbridge Islanders. So I hope that your members and others in the community will really take it seriously when the city starts asking to have you participate in that process.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Mhm.